this webinar. We're talking about biophilia this time. My name is Marloes Reining. And for those that have been following us and attending our webinars for quite a while, you might have seen that our logo and name has changed a little bit. We have moved from the Living Future Collaborative South Africa to the Regenerative Collaborative South Africa. It's a name change, and it's really nothing has changed. Basically, we're still the same people, we're still the same organization, we still have the same goal. It was just an agreement with the International Living Future Institute that we could no longer use the Living Future Collaborative. And so we've moved to Regenerative Collaborative, but nothing changed, and we've tried to make the transition as smooth as possible. So keep on following us. So with the Regenerative Collaborative, we're still doing the work and spreading the word around the International Living Future Institute and the work and the mission that they are bringing into the world. And their mission is really a beautiful one, which is building a world that is socially just, culturally rich, and ecologically restorative. And they are doing that through a number of programs like the Living Building Challenge, Living Community Challenge, and the Living Product Challenge, and some other transparency labels like Declare, Just, and Reveal. And it's a really exciting program. And if you have been following us in the other webinars, you probably know a little bit more. And in the coming months, we're also going to highlight some of the other programs. So last month, it was the Living Product Challenge. And next month, we're going to do a webinar on the Living Community Challenge. So if you want to follow us and the work that we're doing or join the collaborative, we are organizing webinars and events. We're doing advocacy and education around living buildings and really creating awareness of bringing out this motivational and inspirational certification system, and as well as like creating more awareness around taking green buildings to the next level and really creating sustainability within the built environment. So yeah, join us if this resonates with you. We can always use volunteers to help us organize what we're doing. So these are some of our previous events, and you can find them on the Greenet website if you want to learn more about it. These are still available for CPD as well, CPD points. So if you're in need, you can have a relook at these webinars that we've done already and get your CPD points for them. For today's webinar, we have Greenet as the sponsor, and Greenet is an online educational platform which keeps the ethos of sustainability and really wants to provide you with high quality educational material around sustainability in the green building environment. So Greenet is sponsoring this webinar. Online education, online sustainability education. It's an online resource for professionals and students who want to learn more about sustainable design. It's all online, e-learning. You can do the courses. We have courses on introduction into green buildings, and we're also hosting all the webinars from the Regenerative Collaborative. Our mission is to deliver best-in-class online education appropriate to the African context and build powerful synergistic relationships with professionals and providers within the built environment so that together we can make the necessary advances needed to drive the green building movement. It's really knowledge at your fingertips, so visit our website, and we're hoping to add a lot of content in the coming years. So as we're doing these webinars and other webinars, the content will add to it. So have a look there. So let's dive into the topic of today, and that's biophilia. And I often say it's not the most beautiful word because it usually sounds like a little bit as a virus or like a bacteria, but in this case it's actually literally meaning love of life. And in our built environment, we use it as a terms of how can we bring nature back into our building design, and how can we encourage and enrich the relationship between the built environment and nature. And there's a lot of ways of doing that, and I'm sure Camilla is gonna teach us a little bit there. So where it originates from and why we were choosing this topic for this webinar is because within the Living Building Challenge certification system, we have an imperative that deals with the biophilic environment. So as if you're doing a project that is targeting a Living Building Challenge project, and Fabio will talk a little bit about a project, a case study in South Africa, who has applied this system and obviously looked at this imperative as part of that. And this imperative really encourages project teams to look at Biophilic in their design, and they must dedicate a full day around how they can increase biophilia into their design. So they have to organize a day with the whole team, do a workshop and come up with ideas and brainstorm how they can include biophilia in the design. And then after that, you have to come up with a framework that then sort of outlines for your project your biophilic framework, and you have to keep on updating that as you go along in the project. So that's how we came up with this topic, and I'm going to introduce the presenters for today. And our first presenter is going to be Camilla Budden, and she is a biophilic designer who loves to take transdisciplinary and a holistic approach to projects. She has a master's in sustainable development management and planning, as well as a diploma in interior design. And she's going to give an introduction into biophilic design. That's going to be setting the scene for the next presenter, and that's Fabio Venturi. And Fabio has been working in the sustainable built environment for over 19 years across government and private sectors. And he heads up Terramansi Consulting and has worked on probably the first Living Building Challenge project in South Africa, which is the Green School. And he's going to be talking about and sharing with us his experience of their biophilia and how they integrated it in that particular project. So looking forward to both your presentations, and let's kick it off.
Thank you so much, Marlo. As you've introduced me, hi everyone, I'm Camilla, and I've been exploring the field of biophilic design for a few years now. Just a little side note, I am in the throes of new motherhood. I'm a 4-month-old boy. He turned 4 months today, so I'm still technically on maternity leave, but Marlo managed to convince me to present tonight, so I'm very grateful for that. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I hope that in my presentation that I can not only give you guys a deeper understanding of biophilic design, but the why it's so relevant for now and the times that we live in. And then I'm sure Fabio is going to be able to give us some first-hand experience on how it can be applied. Just to sort of start off, the two sort of main reasons why I think biophilic design is so relevant today is firstly, the biodiversity loss issue, this issue that we are facing globally. Back when I was studying, I came across this illustration done in a study through the Stockholm Institute of Resilience. And it really surprised me, and it put me in a bit of a state of panic looking at where we were within our existing within our planetary boundaries. And you guys can see that biodiversity loss is the planetary boundary we have exceeded by the most. And this was all the way back in 2009. So I don't know where we are with this now. This is something that I believe is got to be an issue that we tackle in the way that we design our living built environments. And then the second global issue that we've been facing now for almost 2 years is this pandemic, which has left us with a lot of people experiencing isolation from others and from nature. Now, knowing these two major issues, which I believe biophilic design can contribute to the solution, and it's something that we can all apply, I'm going to just give you guys a bit of background. Maybe you can answer some of the questions Marlo presented. So the term biophilia was first coined by the social psychologist Erich Fromm back in the 1970s, and it was later popularized by the biologist Edward Wilson. And they believed that humans had an innate and genetically determined tendency to seek a connection with nature and other forms of life. So when looking at this from a design perspective, biophilic design brings in that science of our emotional response to nature and our world around us. now looking at biophilic design versus sustainable design, because I'm sure quite a few of you on this call have probably been working around with sustainable design for a while. So I just want to clarify how I see them as different. So sustainable design looks more at buildings' performance. It's a more quantitative approach to design. So the Green Building Council has created brilliant tools that you can use to implement sustainable design, where you can increase the efficiency of energy usage, use better materials with lower carbon footprints, and reduce the waste produced during construction, whereas biophilic design has a more qualitative approach. And it often has got to do more with how we interact with the environment on an emotional, psychological, and sensory level. And I've often used the analogy of a cake, being the sponge of the cake is the sustainable design element, and the biophilic design is that icing on top. So I don't know, my preference is the cake with icing, so it just feels like it's the missing link that sustainable design has been missing for so far. So just to also just go back and look about how when we originally started forming shelter centuries ago, and the way that psychologically what we were trying to do when designing our spaces. If you think back then, it was trying to keep the wilderness out and the predators out and us safe from the terrors that were beyond. And our intention was to remove ourselves from nature. And now centuries later, here we are, and we still seem to be using this sort of mindset when designing, of removing ourselves from our environment and the natural systems that we exist in. And then on top of that, now we have this extra layer that we live in this world full of distractions. So it was almost thought has become almost a side effect of this, or a symptom, is that we are now designed to remove the distractions. So let's just strip it down to the bare minimum so that our environments that we exist in don't distract us. This has resulted in is it's resulted in a lack of us being able to connect with our natural systems and have authentic nature connections, as well as we've managed to strip away a lot of the warmth and character and the cultural elements, the cultural importance of the built environments that we design. So biophilic design can be implemented in a broad spectrum of ways, and it can be anything from a more human-centric way of implementing it, where we look at just focused on improving the human's well-being. And some quick ones would be in how to bring in more natural lighting, or to implement more natural ventilation in a building, or let's bring in a living wall, green wall, or pot plants. And as you can see in this picture, this is a perfect example. This is probably an office where they've tried to implement these biophilic design elements. What I really try to sort of hone in on and encourage with biophilic design is to think that one step further in how do we not only try and improve our well-being in the space, but how do we support biodiversity within the spaces that we design? And this is on a much larger, more urban planning scale. But as you can see here, here's a wildlife corridor that has been designed and built across a human boundary, which allows larger mammals to traverse from one wilderness area to another. Another great example, also on more of an urban planning scale, of biophilic design is something that we have in Cape Town, is tidal pools. And for me, I love using them as an example because they bring people together, and there's a lot of a cultural importance around tidal pools, gathering as a community and experiencing them. And then as well as it creates a safe place for us to engage with the environment, which it being the ocean, which can sometimes be a very scary place for some people. And then at the same time, these pools create little nurseries where small ocean creatures actually often nest and lay eggs and allow their young to sort of exist in this nursery setting before they go out at the high tide into the big ocean. So those are two examples on a more larger scale of an implementation of biophilic design. So there are amazing resources out there for you to read more on biophilic design. One of them being, there's this manual you can get download online by Terrapin bright green, which are a very well-known consultancy that are implementing biophilic design very successfully. And I'll get Marlo to share some of the resources that I often use. But we could go on for days on the theories and all the different patterns. And as you can even see in the slide, there's 6 elements that can be broken down into 14 patterns. And then these can be broken down into even 70 design attributes. So this is something you guys can definitely explore within your own time. And I'm just going to go over a few examples and briefly go over the 3 categories. Number 1 being the nature of the space. And as you can see in this visual, which a colleague of mine, an architect, Mel, who goes by the name Wild Design, we often collaborate together because we both really share that passion of supporting biodiversity in the way that we design. And if you look at this image, you can see in the illustrations in the left-hand column, there's a lot of straight lines, right angles, quite rigid, versus the illustrations on the right-hand side, where there's a lot of organic form and biomorphic shapes and sort of complexity to them. So interestingly enough, visually, we prefer the more organic, complex visuals because this is mimicking nature. And what this does for us is it engages our minds in a process called soft fascination, where what ends up happening is it actually allows our brains to take a rest from direct attention function, which we use when we are doing activities that take all of our attention, such as writing an email or presenting. And what the soft fascination activities do is it's a gentle distraction we get from engaging in a low stimulation activity, such as watching the trees sway or sitting near a stream and listening to the water. So this is the first category in biophilic design, which you can try and implement into space, and that would be nature of the space. The next category is nature in the space, and this can be quite self-explanatory, but I'm giving us an example firstly of ways to support nature in the space. And this is again by my architect friend Mel. She created this thing, it's called Amphibiade or frog ladder, where if you think about how traditional swimming pools have been made with the walls that go straight up, it's not really a great design for little insects or frogs to get out of a pool, and they often get trapped inside the pools and end up dying. So what she created was this, it's almost like a frog ladder that allows insects and frogs to exit out of the water safely. So this is just a very small micro design of how you can design for nature in the space, allowing nature to exist within the spaces that we design. Another example here are these bamboo rice barns. And what I love about this picture is it shows the contrast of the bamboo tile roof, which is the rice barn in the front, versus the corrugated iron roof at the back. And the front one is a perfect example of creating and designing that in a way that supports other life and biodiversity and habitat, versus the one at the back, which is the newer design, which doesn't. So this is again just sort of showing you a good visual example of allowing nature in the space. Then the last category is natural analogs, and this is often mimicking patterns and textures that we find in the outdoors. And this is often used in ornamentation, using materials or shapes, sequences, patterns, and objects. The next few slides are just showing a few examples. Here again, you can see with the sort of rock used in this wall. And if you go on to the next one, it's an example of a water feature in Singapore. Singapore is probably one of the cities where you can find a lot of successful examples where biophilic design has been implemented. So you can see this water feature mimics the sort of shape and the falling of the natural waterfall. And if you go on to the next one, it's another park in Singapore where they have created these sort of ornamental structures to mimic trees that light up. These are examples of natural analogs. So there are three areas where we have used biophilic design successfully over the last while, and where a lot of research has already been starting to be done. And the first one being within the healthcare industry. Here, you can see in this image is an example of a Norwegian hospital retreat where end-of-life patients can go and retreat and spend time with their families in an environment that still has all the hospital equipment that they need and is still a sterile and safe environment for them to be in, but it allows them to be in an intimate setting with their family or visitors in an environment that is soothing and restorative and close to nature. And it has gained a lot of popularity and a lot of positive feedback from the families and the patients that have been making use of it. And here you can see, here's another one, is a cancer treatment hospital, again using a lot of use of natural lighting and vegetation, access to gardens. The studies have shown that biophilic design can aid in recovery, end of life, quality of life, and as well as pain management. There was a study that's called the brick wall study, where they had patients in the same hospital and half were looking out on a park and the other half were looking out on a brick wall. And those looking out at the brick wall needed more pain meds than those looking out at the park. Cool. Then the second area where biophilic design has been used effectively is in our places of work. Place of work has changed, I think, a lot for most of us. When I think back to the sort of environment that people were working in a decade ago with, harsh fluorescent lights and very cold offices. Often, everyone had to go layered up in jackets and you were dressed for winter in the middle of summer, and not a lot of natural lighting or ventilation, and the dividers at the desks. And to think where we are now. So places of work have effectively been using biophilic design, and research has shown that it helps with staff retention as well as task completion and productivity. So these have been motivators to encouraging employers to integrate more biophilic elements in the way that they design places of work. Here's just another example. You can see this is in a very urban setting, an interior of an office space where they had a breakaway area where it's mimicking, where they're using a lot of the natural analogs in this picture. I'm going to allow Fabio to elaborate more on education and child care. But this is the third area where research has been done and where biophilic design has been used effectively. It's been shown to help with gaining autonomy and allowing kids to have creative play, teamwork, and attention. It helps with attention in a world that we live in today, where the opportunities for kids to experience free-range child play. It really allows us the opportunity to create these spaces where kids can still explore freely and allow their imaginations to run wild. So as you can see here, just to touch on again on the schooling and child within biophilic design, and you can see if you look at a traditional jungle gym, it's very static and it's the same toys and play area that the children engage with every day. Whereas when taking kids out in an environment that is organic and ever changing, there's always something different. There's always something new to explore and different ways in which to use your body. So yeah, those are just a few examples. I'm going to sort of just end off here, and I just want to end with really just one thing for everyone to take away today. And that is, I think in my exploration of biophilic design, there's many ways in which it can be integrated, as I have briefly touched on. And it's really, for me, how do we deal with improving well-being of people, because we have our built environment that we engage with on a daily basis, but how do we also support biodiversity in the spaces that we create? And for me, I've really found that we really need to start engaging with specialists such as ecologists and botanists and people that have a deeper understanding of the environment around us. And yes, sure, we can bring more natural lighting into a place, and we can bring more natural ventilation in, and we can change materials to more natural materials with natural textures. How do we design to create more authentic nature experiences and really tackle this global issue we have of biodiversity loss? Because I believe through tackling this issue, we will then as well be dealing with improving our well-being. So yeah, and this can be done from any scale, from anything from a flat balcony to larger, more urban planning. So that's kind of where I really focus on my work and where my passion lies. I hope that this has been informative, and I'm going to hand back over to Marlo, and I look forward to hearing how Fabio has implemented some of the biophilic design elements into the school in Paarl. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. That was great. It's so good to see. And, you know, often when we talk about biophilia, often people think, oh, we just put some plants in the space and then, you know, you have that connection to nature. But it's so much more than just plants in a space. It's, you know, the shapes, the texture, the interaction, and what the space does to you. So that was a brilliant overview. For those that haven't seen it yet, I copy-pasted some links to the Terrapin 14 Patterns of Design and also the Stephen Kellett and Colbre's Biophilic Design links. So have a look at those. Those are probably the two main examples and resources that you can have a look at where you want to improve the biophilic design of your space. Okay, so another exciting presentation coming up. Fabio, are you ready to share your experience with us on the Green School? I'm very excited to hear.
Thanks, Marlene. This was a fun presentation to put together. Thank you very much, Marlene, and the team at the Regenerative Collaborative for inviting me back to talk about Green School, this time on biophilic design. And I think the title, Our Journey, is probably the best way to sum it up, because it has certainly been a journey. It's taken about 3 years to get to where it is now. It's been a very exciting journey. As Molly mentioned, my name is Fabio Venturi. I'm the founder of the Terramanzi Group. We specialize in environmental, social, and regenerative design. And our story today is really one of inspiration. Most of you will know who this is. It's Greta. She's a global symbol of hope and inspiration. I put her up here because I'm inspired by youth and their determination to achieve their goals, no matter what the odds are against them. Here at Terramanzi, we are laser focused on doing good while doing business, and we strive to contribute to the greater good and try to be more impactful as a company and for our clients. And the education space, the sector specifically, really excited us and aligned with these values. And we were on the lookout for a project that would fill this need for some years. And along came Green School South Africa. So just a quick introduction to Green School. It was conceived by John and Cynthia Hardy. They've got a holistic student-guided approach to the education system, and they produced a number of leading young environmental entrepreneurs globally. Bali is the first one that's gone up, and it's recognized by global leaders, the likes of Jane Goodall and Ban Ki-moon have all graced the school grounds. Our client, Alba Brandt, loved the idea so much that she brought it to South Africa, and we were tasked with the sustainable design for the school. So just a quick overview. Typical green building is very well demonstrated in the education space. It worked, but it wasn't enough for the project. We needed something that really gave back, something that wasn't less bad, but regenerative. And that's where the Living Building Challenge came in. It's the most rigorous certification system on the planet, and it really resonated with the ethos of Green School. So this is just an illustration of the system. There's a number of imperatives, and one needs to achieve all of them to get full living building certification. We're tasked with certification of 5 projects and 2 petal projects on the campus itself. And as part of those imperatives, as Marlu has mentioned, biophilic design is one of those imperatives. It was really quite an incredible journey, an experience for us and the entire professional team. They really were champions. You've heard this a little bit earlier. Biophilic design is a deliberate attempt to translate the inherent human affinity to affiliate with nature into the design of the built environment. Now that may seem like a simple statement, an intuitive statement, but it really was a mind shift for the entire professional team, as opposed to design first and think about that afterwards. So that was really a big focus of the project, is to just flip that mindset and to start here, and it all flows from there. We were invited here today to share our experiences on biophilic design with the Green School. And we're going to be focusing on 2 things, which we've been asked to talk about. The one is our experience with bringing the team on board and the process that we followed practically to get everyone up to speed and into the flow. And then secondly, how the design elements were realized on campus. So this is a very high level overview of a program we designed for the team. And we're happy to share our experience on this offline. There's a number of sort of modules and components to a program to get biophilic design from a sort of concept to making it happen. There was an awareness building sort of campaign where we introduced everyone to it. Those principles that I mentioned a little bit earlier, where we had to flip it on its head. There was module training where we had to really pull it apart using the Kellett's reference material and a number of other documents to really just crystallize all the various concepts with the team. We designed exercises for the team. We gave them homework, and then we collated the ideas. We picked their brain. We went from conceptual ideas to details on our idea scale, and then we started designing it. I've put the architect's logo up there, GAS. I mean, they really were superheroes, and at the end of the day, it was really phenomenal to see how they took what came out of this process of biophilic design and made it real, and what you will see on the ground with Green School is exactly that. So Marlu alluded to a little bit earlier, you need to spend a full day, 8 hours with the professional team, teaching them all about biophilia and running them through a whole range of things at the very least. We didn't want to scare them too much, so we did fib a little bit for a 2-hour session, but it was very productive, and this is an example of what we did with them, and they really came to the party. It was fantastic to work with the team. We had crisp icebreakers, and we asked human questions. It's a very important component. Is the team was of the full understanding that architects were not architects, engineers were not engineers, and so forth. Right around the table with all the professionals, everyone had to take their speciality hats off and be humans, because biophilia is all about the human experience, and we wanted them to experience the design through their senses and feel their way through the design ideas. So we started off at the top, and what we needed were guiding principles. These were soft concepts that needed to permeate into the thinking of the team. Specifically up there on the screen, you'll see some of the principles that we put in place. Celebrate sustainable materials and technologies. Contrast existing construction methodologies, and you'll see some of the experience here that comes out of that. And construction aesthetics that do not reflect conventional construction technologies. We had a lot of fun with the team on that. So space and place was the fundamental concept, and the team really had to immerse themselves in this concept, because this would create the context, the flavor, the look and feel, an anchor for the design thinking process that was ahead of the team. This started off with bioclimatic design together with comfort engineers, Climetric. We looked at what Paarl was all about, the site, rainfall, temperatures, and so forth, and how that all contributed. We looked at the fauna, the flora, the general receiving environment, all of this sort of played into the design informants. We also got into really interesting conversations as to what makes Paarl. What is the Paarl ecosystem? How does it work? And how do we connect to that ecosystem through the design process? The team was also encouraged to engage all of their senses, so both physical and perceptive as part of the process. It's all about being human, after all, and very important to feel one's way through that. We also looked at how we could celebrate the history and the culture of the area, and how people would interact with these spaces, and how people would interact with people in those spaces. This led to some really interesting discoveries, and specifically that Potqua populated that area some years ago with approximately 18,000 clan members, and they were the richest of the Khoi tribes in the area. There was some really interesting conversation that came out of that, and yeah, it led to a lot of very good questions. Really, this formed the anchor, the space and place component of the design informants going forward, from a macro scale in terms of how the entire campus fits into the landscape, right down to how the internal components fit into the campus. So we mentioned the Kellets, a reference again, and here are those design principles. So once those fundamentals were established, we moved into these principles. This is a table illustrating the various elements. It's a useful reference. However, we found it didn't create that connection, that tacit experience that we needed for the team to create a handle for the process. So we just referenced it in a different way, using the various documentations available. And this table creates a human connection of experience, and it is all about experience. So you've got direct experiences of nature, things such as light and air, wash across our senses, water playing with our acoustic, visual, and olfactory senses, interaction with plants, animals, weather. You've also got indirect experiences, so connection to images of nature, natural materials, colors, shapes, forms. And then finally, you've got space and place from a component perspective. So that's very important as a sentient being, which we all are, being part of that space and place. So this methodology really helped to provide anchors and grab holds for the team to create tangible connections of experience and emotion and commonality. This is an example of some of the exercises that we ran the team through in various workshops. We would ask them to, after we ran through all of those design elements in detail, which I haven't shown yet, we would ask them to then come up with some ideas. And we'd collate all those ideas. We did this at the macro scale, and we also did it at the micro scale. I mentioned a little bit earlier homework. This is just an extract from one of our workshops where they had to go home and back to the office and do homework. We then come back together again and we proceed. And that's how it kind of all rolled out into that structure that we showed a little bit earlier. And really the team worked incredibly well together and really put some good stuff in play. So we're now going to touch on some of the design elements for the school and just dive straight into it. Direct experiences of nature, we mentioned that a little bit earlier. These are just extracts from that table. Light, this is fundamental to human health and well-being. It also helps with things such as orientation, to the day, night, and seasons, as well as sun. So in this particular photograph, you've got an image of some of the classrooms, and their clear stories were conceptualized with constant ingress of light into the buildings. So it really helps with that exposure, and also assists with circadian rhythms, as you know, of course, important. A lot of those elements were salvaged from demolition shops. Natural ventilation is also very important for human comfort, productivity, and you can enhance this in the design by looking at things like airflow, temperature, humidity, pressure, and you can achieve it quite simply. It doesn't have to be complex. In this instance, a simple cross ventilation design was used in the classrooms. And this led to some interesting discussions, specifically with regards to the predominant wind directions in the area. Water is particularly fun to work with. It's a great stress reliever and it's attractive. And that's especially pronounced when you have multiple senses stimulated by water. So whether you see it, you hear it, you touch it, you taste it, or you note movement in the water, it's all positive. And it's often perceived as most pleasing when it's clean and in motion and experienced through multiple senses. So in this instance, together with the design team, we integrated these characteristics to the campus. So you'll see things such as water furrows, waterfalls, rain chains, simple design elements, but they work really well and they evoke the full set of sensory experiences in the design and in practice. Weather is also very important. It's an essential feature of people's connection to nature. It also creates responses in terms of survival, comfort, danger, and that perception is quite strong. So their design strategies can include views to the outside, porches, decks, balconies, and so forth. In this instance, on an admin building, there is a first-story balcony that's exposed to the elements. We had some interesting discussions on this, specifically it being a school and wanting to see kids experiencing the Northwester in its sort of full glory, but practically, that had its challenges. So something a little bit more tamed was implemented. These are just some photos of that particular facility in build. Natural landscapes and ecosystems. This really is quite self-explanatory. It's an interconnected system. And interestingly, what came out of the research on biophilic design is people prefer landscapes with spreading trees and savanna type settings where humans evolved. It makes them feel safe. And this also speaks to things like prospect and refuge, where you've got sort of treed areas and scrubby areas to go and relax. So you'll see that this is a classic coherent landscape, rich in savanna type features. There's trees for refuge, shade, and a diverse amount of shrubbery. Natural materials was something that the project really excelled at. These can be very stimulating. They really bring out positive visual and tactile responses. Artificial materials can't do that as well. And on the school, wood, reed, stone, sand, slates all contributed in various forms and compositions to this. And this is evidenced both inside and outside the building. You'll see extensive use of reed. The walling is rammed earth. There's wood, there's slate and rock. It really is quite extensive. So I talked a little bit earlier about learnings on natural building, and the team did have quite a bit of fun on site as well, with significant testing to ensure structural integrity, color blending, and texture correctness, and it allowed for some excellent engineering at the end of the day. Really, some really good stuff came out of that. Natural colors. Color has been important for humans because we're daytime creatures predominantly. We've used it to locate food, water, other resources. It's also used for facilitating movement and wayfinding. With biophilic design, the emphasis is really on muted earth tones. And where one does use bright colors, it needs to be very specific. So emphasizing environmental forms like flowers, sunsets, sunups, plants or animals. This is a great example of the design and how that materialized using colors and shapes and forms. It really came out stunningly. Shapes and forms is also appealing from a natural world perspective. These can be things like leaf-like patterns, trees. They can be located as shapes on plants, shapes of plants or building facades. They can be woven into fabrics, coverings, and so forth. So these are elements of shapes and forms, natural tree-like patterns found on columns, seed pod structures. I'll go into that a little bit later. And that talks about integrating parts to whole. And some of these have been designed to achieve bioclimatic designs as well. They're found throughout the project. Age, change, and the patina of time. This was a very interesting imperative of biophilic design to look at. It really creates something tactile to see something aging, whether it be a moss on a rock, landscape evolving through vegetation growth, the aging of copper, steel, or any other metal, and wood. And there's a few elements scattered throughout the school. These are just some of the design elements that touch on that. Some of the cupboard doors have old paint and metal and wood, vegetation growth on the rocks, which will also mold over in time. And there are other elements as well in terms of copper taps and piping. Biomimicry, as it says, it's forms and functions found in nature, and what it does is it provides us with hints to suggest solutions for human needs and problems. So we've got some great examples of biomimic design in the project, tree-like functional structures on site, which are used extensively. And this particular slide shows photosynthesis. This is part of a slide extract I gave to the grade 4 class at Green School to demonstrate some of the biomimicry on site, where it's turning sunlight into energy. Integration of parts to whole was a particularly exciting component of space and place. This is where one takes disparate parts of a whole, and through sequential and successional linking of these spaces, it all sort of pulls together. And huge kudos to the architectural team for really pulling this together so well. So what I'm going to do is just take you through a visual journey from a classroom. So here we are in one of the classrooms. It's a safe space, looking out into another safe and connected space. Here we see a cluster of classrooms forming their own little community. Taking it up a level, that cluster starts to form part of the larger landscape, and more so. And you have a whole bunch of little sort of communities connected through various features. And if you look at that side plan, you'll start to see it coming together. So this all really was inspired through natural forms. So the concept of a seeded core fruit, cell structures that, to connect buildings with the same function, in that particular instance, classrooms, to each other, and connecting parts of the fruit to the whole of the fruit, of the cell to the whole of the cell. That's also visible at a landscape scale. Prospect and refuge is a design angle that looks at a safe space, it looks at a dangerous space. These are perceptions that people look at. So these are sites of safety and security, and it's something that links up to curiosity as well, which is another design element. And in this particular instance, jungle gyms is a solid example to use for prospect and refuge. There are a number of other focus areas and sort of nooks and crannies and exciting elements of the school that fulfill this function. These are all safe, happy spaces for the kids to go and be themselves. Cultural and ecological attachment to place. So we talked a little bit earlier about some of those anchor design principles, and this is where it comes in. And this also links to the previous slides that I showed on connection to whole. And culturally relevant designs promote a connection to that place in that sense of setting. And I just wanted to show an SDP sort of level diagram at how this all just seamlessly flows. It's its own community, it's connected, it's culturally relevant, and it fits in. Mobility and wayfinding influences people's comfort and well-being. We are free moving, and that is complemented by pathways and points of entry and egress that are clear and well marked. And this has been a particularly strong focus of the design. It's really quite free-flowing, it's enticing, and it creates a lot of joy moving through the site. Indigenous materials, linking to the previous slides as well, is an area that the project shone. So this also links to cultural component and gives the user a sense of place. So in this particular instance, we've mentioned the wood and the natural materials on site, with the reed specifically linking back to the kwakwa and the traditional methodologies that were used on site or in the area years ago. So it honors that indigenous history of the area. And then just to emphasize the hero of the day for this project really was Alba. He's a dreamer and a planet shaper, and really one of the most incredible clients that we've had the pleasure of working with. And here's a couple of useful links to Green School. I'd encourage you to watch the TED Talk. It really is quite inspirational. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Bali was the first to launch. Green School South Africa has opened, and New Zealand was delayed. I believe they recently tried to open, but they were locked down for some considerable time now, and they are virtual for a while. One of the inspirations for us feeling so passionate about the education sector is climate change and pollution are really indictments against humanity. So if our education doesn't prevent us from destroying the environment, then no matter what qualifications we may have, it's simply insufficient and irrelevant. And that's us.
Thanks, Fabio. That is great. Did you get any of the kids involved in this whole process? Did you do some activities or? Yes.
So early on, there was lots of engagement with potential parents and children and days, and that was something that we looked at as well, was the kids' perspective. If you notice this windowsill, it's at little people height, which is really an important design feature. So we went through a process where we thought about the users and the kids and how they would fit into the space and connect to the space. Yeah, this was one of the outcomes of that process, where we designed it for little people. So they don't have to sort of peer over a windowsill. They can sit at their desk and stare out the window and dream and do what kids do. That's one of the aspects that came out.
That's very beautiful. I'm going to open up the floor for some questions. So if you have any questions, raise your hand or put them in the chat box. I did see quite an interesting question, and I guess, I don't know if anybody on the call would want to answer that one, because I guess it goes across a lot of disciplines. So the question was, when we're talking about biophilia, we obviously have all these pictures of these buildings with these creeping trees all over the place and plants. So the question is, where do all those plants' roots go into the buildings, and how are they controlled? So I think I've never done a building like that, so I can't really answer the question. Fabio, do you know? Camilla, do you have an answer? Any architects on the call that know how to I would imagine you have some root barriers that you can use in spaces, and I would also imagine you would use vegetation that doesn't have very deep roots that go into the space. I see some nodding there, so I guess I'm on the right track.
So just quickly from our side, the landscape architect was closely involved with those aspects. I know the engineers always get very stressed if they hear about vegetation on the roof, because they've got to reinforce and waterproof and so forth. But yeah, those were considered, like ficus, for example, has very aggressive roots. So, those kind of trees and the like were planted very far away from any builds. Camilla, from your side?
Yeah, very much what Fabio is saying. You would consider the type of root systems of the plants you're going to use. I think the last picture I used as a reference is just where they've greened a building, but you would really want to use plants that don't have an aggressive root system that will disturb the infrastructure that you have in place. From first-hand experience, we tried planting a green roof on our hemp house, and we have a timber frame house. And we found it quite a challenging situation, and I wouldn't redo using a timber frame house with a planted roof. Just from first-hand experience, it needs to have a more solid foundation if you're going to have that weight of the soil and a good drainage system, and plants in our sort of climate in Cape Town that can survive the southeasterly.
Thanks, guys. There's some questions in the chat box. Fabio, if you can share the links that were in that last slide in the chat box, that would be great. Another question, will you aim for Green Star certification as well, next to the Living Building Challenge certification, or one is enough?
The logic trail there was achieve Living Building certification, and then it should be a natural flow into something like Net Zero for Green Star, which is potentially the next step. But yeah, we've still got a bit of a way to go, and just focused on the LBC at this point.
I think that probably is a really good achievement to achieve Living Building Challenge. And if you want to learn more about the Living Building Challenge, also drop us an email. We do presentations on introduction into the Living Building Challenge. So if you want to do a presentation for your company, or if you have an audience of more than 10 people, we're happy to explain in detail what the Living Building Challenge is about. There is another question. What does it take to have a green school in Botswana? I guess Fabio did one.
Yes, Tebby, maybe if you can just connect with me afterwards, I can facilitate an introduction to Alba. I'm sure she'd be able to assist with that.
Great. And there's also a question, did you achieve net zero? Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so net zero would come with a green star naturally, because living building is a regenerative exercise. So, but yeah, at the moment the focus is just on wrapping up LBC.
So yeah, so as part of the LBC, net zero is a minimum requirement basically. So net zero water, net zero energy. So it would have to meet those requirements. There's another great question. I'm a student studying biosystems engineering in the US. Do you have any advice on how I can get more involved with the regenerative design career? Camilla, do you want to take that one on?
I see someone responded by saying consider doing a Living Future accreditation with the International Living Future Institute. So that's a good one. With regenerative design, I would consider. They're based in the US. There's some great, I know mainly in the UK, institutes where you can do a course on biophilic design, and I just think that's a good foundation to have, in which you could integrate into whatever. I can see biosystems engineering. To have that understanding, I think would be really great. So I would consider doing some sort of course or diploma or in biophilic design. And I can share some institutes that I know.
Great. Yeah, and I think maybe to add to that, besides biophilic, there's also biomimicry. So, and there's a lot of education around biomimicry around worldwide. So you could also look into that in addition. There is a question, there were two questions around the water systems. Fabio, can you share a little bit more
on the sewage and that? So there's a wastewater treatment system with bioswales and a whole range of other technologies attached to that. Important in terms of LBC is it cannot be a chemical system. So that took quite a bit of consideration in terms of putting that together.
And then a question, great question. I'm a huge fan of biophilic design, and she's done her thesis around it. How do we start to begin to speak about biophilic design to developers? Like, how can we make it, I guess, sexy, or how can we make it mainstream in our architectural design? I think, Camilla, would you want to tackle that one?
Again, I think when I spoke about the difference between sustainable design and biophilic design, and when dealing with projects, when I collaborate with the architect from Wild Designs, is that we find an easy way to bring biophilic elements into a space is through landscape design and bringing in certain vegetation and working where you're bringing in endemic species that will create habitat. And that, for me, has been an easy way of introducing biophilic design into building spaces, is through the landscape design and architecture, and having a really in-depth knowledge of the fauna and flora of that area. And then beyond that, you're looking at sustainable materials and energy efficient cycles that you're using, which is evolving and developing and becoming, more cost effective with time. But yeah. From just a short answer, I find from more of the fauna and flora and how you can introduce that into a space is often the most cost effective.
Yeah, and I also think like when you talk to developers, I see more and more nature integrated into the architectural design. And I guess it also has to do with like what's the architectural flavor. I don't want to say flavor of the month, but like architecture also goes through, you know, movements and different aesthetics. And I'm hoping that we're going to see much more of biophilic design into, you know, exciting building projects so that it becomes desirable to have a biophilic design building. I just showed on the slides the 2 resources that we've been talking about in the presentations. And just heads up for upcoming events from the Regenerative Collaborative. Next month, we are aiming to have speakers around the Living Community Challenge. So applying like all these good principles around net positive water, net positive energy, materials to a community scale. And then in October, we are organizing an event around regenerative design in Africa with some African projects and inviting the African community to join us on that day. Tulani mentioned on the chat Living Future accreditation. It's basically accreditation that is offered by the International Living Future Institute, where you can deepen your knowledge around the Living Future, Living Building Challenge, Living Community Challenge, and all the other systems that they have. Currently, we've got 4 people in South Africa who have achieved their Living Future accreditation, and I can say from experience, it's a really incredible course to do. Basically, you need to do the foundational course, which gives you all the presentations around the different systems of the ILFI and International Living Future Institute. And besides that, you can then choose 16 generic courses that you can do. And as the collaborative, we are going to aim for making those 16 points really South African specific. So we're hoping to come up with the course content for those 16 additional credits so that you can do that based on African, so that not everything is very American based, but the foundational course is standard. So then again, just want to invite you, if you've enjoyed this webinar, follow us on our social media. And if you have for some free time and you want to help us spread the word around a living future and a regenerative future, come join us and help us organize these events and join us with our other activities. So again, thank you very much to our sponsors. Greenet, we really need the sponsorship. This covers the cost of our events and the costs are not high. So if you have a company that wants to sponsor one of these webinars, please reach out to us. It's really the cost for validating the CPD credits. So it's not really a huge cost. So if you're keen on sponsoring, if you want to be associated with a particular topic or a particular webinar, please reach out to us. And a really big thank you to our 2 presenters of today, Camilla and Fabio. We really appreciate your time and your sharing your experience on this topic. And I really hope that we're going to get some more biophilic design buildings in our country and create a lot more nature around our very concrete built environment and really get that going. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time and effort. And thank you to everyone for coming and joining, and thank you for your questions and your interactions. And I hope you have a great evening. Keep well and see you next month in our next webinar.